So now let's bring on the reason that we're here. We're here for Ernie Cowan. He's a former mayor of Escondido, and he is a writer for our local newspaper and the author of this book, and he is going to take it from here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be talking to a group, a horticultural group tonight, because I know you think a little bit like I do. You enjoy nature and the beauties of nature. Oftentimes I'll speak to a Rotary Club and half the group's thinking about their golf game or something. They don't care about what I'm going to talk about. So it's a pleasure to be here. I want you to know I'm a little disappointed though. I heard tonight you were giving away agave. When I found out it wasn't tequila, I was really disappointed. So, but oh well, I guess we live with what we've got. So anyway, thank you. As Karen mentioned, for over 30 years now, I've written an outdoor column for the San Diego Union-Tribune. For 6 years, I was the bird man, if you will, of the Union-Tribune. I wrote a wild bird column. Some of you may have read that faithfully every month. And then we morphed into more of a nature outdoor column that covers lots of things. And it's not just an ordinary, this is a bird and he lives here and he lays 12 eggs and, and I give my wife credit for this. She looked at my copy one day and she said, it's all great information, but there's no heart in it. You don't write from the heart. And it got me to think about what it is that touches each of us about nature. And it's different probably for all of us. But I started focusing on writing from the heart. And so that's what I do now. Anybody can go to a book or go online and find out information about a trail that's 3.2 miles long and you're going to see an oak tree at this, but that's not what I write about. I write about things that make you feel in certain ways and hopefully interpret them for you in ways that make you feel good. So the title of my talk tonight is There's a Marmot in My Pack. And I'm going to say that's an odd title for a talk, but I'll explain it in a minute. And let's see if I can make this work. What button do I push? Let's try that. Okay, there's a Marmot in my pack. There's the title. Now, first of all, I want you to know that this is basically about the mysteries, encounters, and reflections that I've gathered over 30 years of nature writing, and that it reflects in what I'm going to talk about tonight and the book, of course, by the same name. I've been recognized as outstanding in my field, and that proves it right there. I'm outstanding in my field. Okay, you can see what kind of talk this is going to be. So, all right, your kind of talk. Okay, I told you this is a good audience. Sometimes, however, I'm not as visible as you would think I should be. That is really me there, fully camouflaged out. And there's a funny story that goes with this. It was up on Palomar Mountain. I was trying to photograph mountain bluebirds. And if any birders in the room, mountain bluebirds come to Palomar Mountain. It's a great place to go see them at the right time of the year. So I dressed up in my ghillie suit and I hunkered down in the brush. And there's a little pathway around Doan Pond that some of you probably have walked. And the bluebirds like that gravel, I guess, in the pathway. And I was getting great pictures. Well, a fisherman came walking along, older gentleman carrying his fishing pole, and he scared the bluebirds away. Okay, well, that's all right. We'll share the path. So I figured, well, it's a good time to stand up and stretch. And so I stood up and I thought the poor man was going to have a heart attack and die. He grabbed his chest and he staggered back. But then he began swearing, so I knew he was going to be okay. And I apologized profusely and went about my business. But sometimes you have to be careful where you're at and what it is you're doing. But as an outdoor writer, I've had a great opportunity to experience the outdoors in many facets, if you will. I've fished some of the most beautiful waters in the country, including the Everglades, and traveled to some exotic places. This is Torrey Pines, not exactly exotic, but it's a beautiful place, if any of you that have been there, so you understand. I love the Eastern Sierra. For those of you that read my columns on a regular basis, you know that I always write a fall piece about the Sierra, because it's a time of the year that country really speaks to me because of the beauty of the aspens. And I wrote a column once on fall is the is the only season that's so beautiful that it has two names, you know, autumn and fall. And so no other season has two names. So yeah, it's a special time. I've traveled to out of the way places out in Anza-Borrego. I love the desert, spent a lot of time out there. These are Indian rock circles that I discovered. There's a butte out in a very remote part of the desert out there where there's over 40 of these. And they're about the size of a man, maybe 6 feet in diameter. I call this the condo. There's 3 of them that are clustered together, and you can see there's kind of a door on the one side there. And what they think this was, but they don't know for sure, was the Indian version of a pop-up tent. And you know what acatillo is? I'm sure you do as horticulturalists. They suspect that they took the long boughs of the acatillo and bowed them over and used the rocks to hold the bows in place. And then used that as a skeletal structure and then covered that with brush. And this was near the shores of the ancient Lake Kauai, which evaporated about 400 years ago. But they came there in the winter months to hunt and to fish. Wouldn't hunt in the lake, you'd fish. And these are temporary camps they think that were occupied by the natives that came out there to live in the wintertime. So it's very fascinating when you see these. I love the desert at night. It's a magical place. If you aren't aware, perhaps you are, Borrego and Anza-Borrego Desert State Park is designated as an international dark sky community and park, respectively. This means that the community has made conscious efforts to direct light down, turn off lights at night, and to preserve that very special dark sky that most people in the cities don't get to see today because of the glow of the light that's there. By the way, the community of Julian recently earned the dark sky designation because of their efforts and are participating in that as well. So that's a pretty cool thing. I wrote a story. This was a story I wrote about midnight at the Oasis. I spent a night out at the 17 Palms Oasis. It was 114 degrees at 9 o'clock at night, but I wasn't doing anything, just sitting there and marveling at the Milky Way. And talk about a very special moment in connection with cosmos, if you will, when you're out there like that and you realize how tiny we are. So why the book? Over the years, I've gotten tons of letters from readers saying, you ought to write a book. Well, and I got to thinking, I have. I've written columns for 30 some years. I got a book. And so I picked some of the best ones and compiled them into a book called There Is a Marmot in My Pack, as it reflects right there. And you're going, that's a strange name. Why is that? Well, I'll explain that to you in just a moment. But the book, by the way, is a collection of what I consider to be some of my better columns written over the years. And we'll talk about some of them, but they're all stories from the heart. And again, thanks to my bride who just awakened me, if you will, to that, is that people want to know how you feel, not what you see. So that has been kind of my inspiration to create the columns that I create today. The first chapter in the book is called The Happy Dancers. And that seems to be a strange title, but then a lot of the stuff I write is strange. But The Happy Dancers is an interesting story. How many here have gone to the Arctic and photographed the Northern Lights or seen the Northern Lights? A number of you. And I don't know if any of you had the experience that I had, but it truly was one of the most profound experiences. And oftentimes I have trouble talking about this because it really emotionally moved me. But as we went to the Fairbanks and then up to the Arctic, I ran into a First Nation native, Athabascan, who asked me, why are you in Fairbanks in the wintertime at 23 below zero? And my wife was asking the same question, oddly enough. And I said, well, we're going to photograph the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. And of course, I was focused on all the technical aspects, the camera equipment and everything I needed to get great pictures of the Northern Lights. But this young lady who I met, the Athabascan native, said, oh, the Happy Dancers. She says, our native lore, folklore, is that the happy dancers are the spirits of the departed. And if you whistle when you see an aurora beginning, they will come down and lift your spirit to heaven and dance with you. I thought, wow, touch me. And so flash forward a couple nights, I was out on this frozen lake north of Fairbanks, and off in the far east, there was a green ball that showed up, started to glow low on the horizon. And remembering the folklore that the Athabascan had mentioned to me, I started to whistle. It was probably a funny thing standing out there at 23 below zero on a frozen lake up to my knees in snow, whistling, but I did. And at that moment, that ball of green light on the far eastern horizon started to shoot across the sky, much like a jet plane moving about that fast across the sky. And then a second one came across, and then they started to expand and create a curtain, if you will. And for those of you that have seen them, you know how sometimes they move. And it was just magnificent. I was standing there crying at the thought of this. And this is what I wrote in my book. My emotions flowed within, followed by tears of joy as I stood in the frozen Arctic night, transfixed by the magnitude of the show. I was knee-deep in snow, but heart-deep with emotions. I've had other profound encounters, and this is a column that I wrote several years ago. You're going to be wondering, why do I go to the Arctic in 23 below, and why do I go to the desert in the middle of July? But I wanted to photograph bighorn sheep. And oftentimes in the warmer summer months, there's only a few water sources available. And so if you hang around those water sources, sooner or later, you're going to get an opportunity to photograph sheep. I say that because I just yesterday was going through my collection of photos. I have over 5,000 images of bighorn sheep. So it's like, oh, okay. Anyway, but this particular July day, it was 111 degrees. I'll never forget that. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, really the mad dog and Englishman time to be out in the noonday sun. And I started to hike up Borrego Palm Canyon a short distance, and I came around a bush and was face to face with this massive, magnificent, full curl ram bighorn sheep. And there's a moment of, oh my goodness, I mean, this is an incredibly powerful animal, and if he didn't like the fact that I was in his path, he could have made life miserable for me. But we both stood there and just looked at one another, and there was no fear on either one of our parts. And it was an incredible moment of connection. And if you notice, look at his horns. They're pitted and broken. This is an animal that will be dead in a year or two. He's mature. He's at his end of life, but he's seen it all. He's survived in a harsh land of the desert. And so I wrote, so many lessons were exchanged as we watched one another. Two warriors of life, showing our age, but also our respect for what each has endured to arrive at this moment and place in time. For a time, it was like old friends sitting silently together and reflecting on lives that have seen things, done things, won, lost, and survived. There was the acceptance, calm, compassion, and understanding that seems to come with age. These were a few golden moments. On that same trip, that night, when it had cooled down to a maybe mere 98 degrees, much more comfortable, we set up camera equipment at the little pond there. If you're familiar with where the trailhead is at Borrego Palm Canyon, there's a little pupfish pond, and it's also a very popular place for the sheep to drink, and to photograph bats. And again, you can write a lot of stories about bats and tell about their mammals and blah, blah, blah. But I was just fascinated by the bats and what I learned by watching them, which you don't do very well after dark. But right at that last whisper of sunset, you start to see them coming out and feeding, and they're feeding on insects. And so what I wrote was, bats can fly at night, often quite rapidly, using a high-tech technique known as echolocation as a form of animal radar that allows them to avoid obstacles as small as a human hair. Imagine that, flying totally blind at night in total darkness and avoiding something as small as a human hair. Or on the other side, capturing something as small as a mosquito or a fly that's hovering over a pond. And that's what they were doing in those photos. So nature can be incredibly fascinating when you see it at that level. Another profound moment was, I've written a lot over the years about Native American things, and especially the Kumeyaay people, which were native to this area. And I had the honor of being invited by some Kumeyaay elders to join them on a trek to an ancient ceremonial site deep in the desert, only accessible by four-wheel drive and then a hike into the mountains. And this cave that they took me to, as you can see, is covered with ancient pictographs on the rock walls. And we began our visit with a sage ceremony to purify and drive away any evil spirits and to bless all of those who were there. And it was a very moving experience. And I wrote about it, and I wrote, I was surrounded by the descendants of those who have occupied this sacred place for more than 10,000 years. The blood of those who created this delicate rock art still runs in their veins. There was a powerful sense of reverence as we huddled in this wilderness rock shelter, and it truly was a very powerful moment. So now, I told you I would tell you, oh, how do I get rid of that up there? I don't know. And how the book got its name. So here is a place at the Eastern Sierra that I visited a few times. I love it. It's a place called Gator Lakes. It's a challenging hike near the back entrance to Yosemite, up over a mountain range into a basin where these beautiful gin clear lakes reside, filled with wild trout. And I hiked back there for a day to do some trout fishing. I had a little backpack on with my lunch in it and hiked back to this beautiful location. And for those of you that fish, you know, you lose all sense of time when you're back there in a place like that. It's glorious. You're living nature's time, and it really doesn't matter what's going on in the world. I put my pack down to fish and was fishing, but then I got hungry, and so I figured, okay, I'm gonna go eat. So I went over to my pack, and there was a marmot with his head in my pack. And this is what everybody says, what's a marmot? That's a marmot right there. They're about this big. And they're curious, non-aggressive, unless you got lunch in your pack, little critters. And of course, my camera was in my pack too. So that's the reason I didn't get a picture of him with his head in my pack. But once he went away, he wasn't satisfied. He knew there was food in there. So he hung around. So I was able to get a good picture of him. And I tossed him some peanuts that I had. So he was happy with that as well. But I'm sure he would have preferred the sandwich. But as I was compiling the book, I'd written the story about the marmot. And as I was compiling the book, I thought, what's a good name? And my wife and I played with a whole bunch of different ideas. And finally, I came up with, there's a marmot in my pack. So like it or not, there's the story. Now you know. When COVID hit, things changed for a lot of us, and we weren't able to do a lot of the things we wanted to do, and a lot of things were actually closed to the public, but nature doesn't close. And I'm fortunate enough to live on a place we call Mount Who. And for those of you that follow, we used to call it Whoville, Mount Whoville. But when I got ready to write the book, I thought, I better just be careful. So I sent a note to the Dr. Seuss people and asked them, since the last 16 years since I've lived on Mount Who, I'd been writing about Whoville. And I said, since I've been writing about it for all that time, I think the name is in the public domain. Can I use it in my book? And they went, absolutely not. It's copyrighted, we own it. You use it, you get sued. So we changed it to Mount Who, which is in honor of the owls that we have there on our property. So it worked out, no problem. But anyway, during COVID, it was a great opportunity to write about the critters of Mount Who. And we have a lot. And so do most of you too, but you probably don't realize it. Of course, I'm sure most of you probably feed hummingbirds, and when the orioles arrive in March every year, they bring such joy to our gardens, and color and energy, and they're clowns, and they bicker, and they're fun birds to have around. in your garden. And when they leave in September, it's really a sad time for a lot of people. It's like family leaving after they've been visiting for a while. So anyway, wrote a lot about the birds. This is a friend of mine. This was a little hummingbird that would show up every morning while I was having my morning coffee on my back patio. And I named him Morning Joe. And Joe would come in and he'd land on the tip of the little agave there. And we'd chat and solve the problems of the world. Well, I'd chat, he'd squeak a little bit once in a while. And but we connected. I mean, he wasn't from here to that camera most of the time, sitting on the little tip of the agave. And I would be sitting there with my cup of coffee. And it was very, very wonderful time. And so I wrote about Morning Joe in my book, and you can read about that as well. And this is what I wrote. Morning Joe, he's my new coffee buddy. I must admit, it has become more than a novelty. My heart soars when I see my new friend, such a tiny, delicate, and beautiful work of nature. And he really is. And then I'm kind of fascinated by the creatures of the night. I have now a total of 8 game cameras scattered around my property. And it's really opened up the world to what's going on out there at night. And we get a lot of coyotes, like you see in the lower right-hand side there. And then in the springtime, we get the little coyote pups that show up as well. They're cuter than the dickens. And then this isn't in the book because this was a more recent column, but a really interesting thing happened. Because of the game cameras, I kind of see a lot of the traveling that's going on. And we sleep with our doors and windows open unless it really, really is cold. We've got a lot of heavy covers and it's nice. But our back door is a screen door, and our cat, Pico, used to spend a lot of the nights I would wake up and he'd be sitting right there at the back screen door looking out, watching what was going on. And I noticed on the game cameras that frequently the coyotes and the bobcats would walk right past the back door. And I was sure that Pico connected with probably the bobcat. And sadly, Pico had to be brought, put down about a year ago. And we knew it was coming, and we had prepared a grave for him that overlooked from the top of the hill down over the vegetation where the other animals live. And so we buried him properly and covered him up well. And that night, the game cameras showed a bobcat coming up and sitting down right next to the grave. And all I can think of is he was escorting him over the bridge. Touching, but bobcat still comes around. I see him almost every night on one of my cameras, as well as the coyotes. They're there all the time. So, and then I've recently upgraded my cameras from the little infrared trail cams. Now I've upgraded my cameras to a much more sophisticated system that takes regular full pictures. Scares the dickens out of the coyotes when the flash goes off, but it gets a great picture. And so we've captured a lot of our friends that way. We got sound. Okay, this guy, that coyote is yelping. Let's see. That's about right outside my bedroom door, probably not 25 feet from my bedroom door. So I don't get a lot of sleep some nights. Nor does my wife. So there we go. And then I love the quail. And for those of you that have quail, you know what I'm talking about. They are just such delightful critters. They are very family-oriented animals. They're a society. It's not a parent and their chicks. It's adult birds and the colony of youngsters, and they take care of them. And they're very doting and very cautious. And you'll see them come out in the mornings with an adult at the beginning and an adult at the end, and the chicks in between marching over. I keep a little terracotta saucer that you normally put under a flower pot on the ground, and I have a drip line into it, so there's always water in it. And that attracts, I call it the possum pond. That attracts everything, but especially the quail chicks when when they hatch. And I call the quail my muttering army, and it's the perfect alarm clock with just one flaw. At the crack of dawn every morning, I am awakened by the subtle chattering of the small army of California quail as they march past my open bedroom window on their way to the seed feeder. And it's just you hear this, and what I think is it's their form of communication so that everybody knows where everybody is. And that dawned on me one day when they were all walking through the foliage and couldn't see one another. And there was that just low level of muttering. So they all kind of knew where each one was. And I thought that was so cool. And this is some of the chicks in the possum pond. It's such a delight. When they show up, usually in June, they show up every year. And so do the snakes. I was surprised the first time I saw, if you don't like snakes, I'm sorry about that. But the first time and we have a big fountain in our front yard, and I saw a king snake and a gopher snake as well, but this one was a king snake, and going to the pond and drink. And I thought, wow, I always had been under the impression that snakes don't drink. They get the moisture they need from the food that they eat. But I did some research, and sure enough, they do. When it's very dry and very hot, they do need supplemental sources of water. So I thought, okay. And if you read my column, you'll know that is probably the single biggest factor in attracting wildlife to your garden is water. Water is life. So always have a source of water for your visitors. And then, of course, in our possum pond, there's always the raccoons. They come in and wash things and then eat them. You know, that's the raccoon with one of the better cameras. I love them. They're so cool. I heard somebody the other day referred to them as trash pandas, and I'd never heard that expression before, but that's true. My wife said she was driving home late one night, and there they were in the neighbor's trash can down about a mile from our house. I thought, yeah, okay, trash pandas is right. And this is one of our bobcats moving through on a game camera. And this is a better shot taken. Look at how beautiful, just the incredible beauty of that animal. Yeah. And the great horned owls. Interestingly enough, the great horned owls and the barn owls don't seem to coexist very well. We had nesting barn owls for a time, and then the great horns moved in, and the barn owls have now left the area. I see them coming through transients once in a while, but not nesting in the area. And I understand they don't share the range very well. But those are fun. That's how we became known as Mount Who. We often get serenades at night of the great horned owls. Great horned owls hoot, the barn owls screech. So that's how you can tell the difference. And you'll be laying in bed at night, and you'll hear maybe one real close hooting, and then you'll hear the echo way off in the distance as another owl is answering, and maybe a third or even a fourth. It's really fascinating to hear them communicate. And then up on Mount Who, we, because we're high, we're about 700 feet above the valley floor around us. Oftentimes we're looking down on some of the birds. We have nesting red-tailed hawks in some pine trees down at the end of our mountain. And it's really fun in the springtime to watch the adults trying to teach the youngsters how to hunt. And but even just regular, when they just are flying by like this, and you get a chance to see them from a different perspective than when you're on the ground normally, it's very fascinating to do. And I've written a lot about eagles. Thanks to man, if you will, eagles have expanded their range significantly. Eagles are a bird that only eat aquatic things. And as the population of humans has expanded and we've built more reservoirs and water sources, that has provided additional habitat for the bald eagle, which were fairly rare in Southern California up until a few years ago. Of course, DDT didn't help either. but we've banned that, and that has helped in their recovery. But this past couple of years, we've had a nesting pair up near Escondido, and I visit them frequently and get pictures like this, which is always fun to do. And of course, if as horticulturalists, I'm sure you all have planted plants that attract butterflies. I'm fascinated by butterflies, and I've written a lot about them. And if you have not gone over, I think they are closed for the season now, the butterfly garden, and I didn't know about it until this year. It's been there for 16 years or something, but it's the butterfly garden in Encinitas. And it's open daily during the summer. They open, I think, in March, and they close at the end of November. And they have a big vivarium, which is an indoor flight cage, which is all planted beautifully with native plants in bloom. And then they have all of the native species are flying around inside there. And so this is it wasn't staged. This is a real picture of a young lady that I photographed when we were visiting for the article that I wrote. So if you haven't gone, do go. It's either Encinitas or just the San Diego Butterfly Garden, and I'm sure you'll find it. It's on Saxony Road in Encinitas. Well worth a visit. Oftentimes, remember I said it right from the heart. One day, I work as a volunteer fire lookout for the U.S. Forest Service on Palomar Mountain, and I work in the Booker Hill or in the High Point fire lookouts. And in fact, I got a shift coming up next week. And one day last spring, I was up there though, and it was no visibility, so there's no sense sitting in a fire lookout tower if you can't see anything, because it was like this. It was foggy, and so I went down and I did some hiking through Palomar Mountain State Park, and I was just moved by the beauty of flowering dogwoods in the mist. And when from a little bit further distance, all you could see was the white flowers, something hanging suspended in space. And it's like, what is that? And as you got closer, you began to see that they were the blossoms of the dogwood in the mist. It was absolutely glorious. So those are again the kinds of things I write about. And then the same day, the dewdrops from the misty fog were glistening on the tiny leaves of the lupin that were starting to bloom. So it was just a magical experience. And what I wrote was, shrouding fog draped over the damp forest, creating a fairy tale mood where you might expect to spy a curious gnome peeking from beneath a toadstool. It was that kind of day. And then just last week, I haven't written about this yet, and probably I'm not sure I will or not, but I was out in the Lake Henshaw, Warner Springs area, and the fall colors are starting to emerge. Now everybody says fall colors in San Diego, but yes, we have, these are all cottonwoods and sycamores that are starting to turn color. Then if you go up at a higher elevation, up towards Palomar or up towards Julian, you have the black oaks that also turn. They're not as dramatic as the aspens of the Eastern Sierra, and certainly not as dramatic as the maples of the East Coast, but they're beautiful. And it's a special time in the woods. There's both a quieting, if you will, in the woods, because things are often damp and they don't make as much noise as they do in the crisp times of summer. But there's also a hurrying as nature prepares for winter. You'll find the woodpeckers are voraciously feeding and gathering up acorns for the coming winter. And the other animals are doing the same thing. So it's a really special time if you go up and tune into it. And if you haven't, you should. I write about the Eastern Sierra in the fall. It's one of my favorite places. I mentioned the beauty there is incredible. And if everyone talks about the Northeast because it's so expansive, and the flowering or the fall maple leaves up there are just magnificent. But there's nothing less beautiful about the Eastern Sierra. it's a very powerful place because you have the grandeur of the Sierra itself, these massive 12,000 foot, 13,000 foot mountains, and then these alcoves, if you will, little areas where you have canyons full of aspens like this, or roads that are littered with aspen leaves. It just is absolutely an incredible place if you haven't gone up there in the fall. Peak time is usually the second week in October, starts late September, goes to 1st of November-ish. But peak time is usually second to third week in September, in October. And this is what I wrote about. Remember I talked about when you see from the heart, sometimes if you're just walking through nature, you're going to miss a lot because nature quiets down, runs away, or hunkers down and doesn't let you know it's there. And so if you've read my columns, I do a lot of writing about what I call sit and see columns. And I'll just go someplace, doesn't have to be fancy. My house is a lot, but I'll go to just someplace in the desert or someplace in the mountains and just sit somewhere for an hour or so. And to truly see and understand nature, you have to become part of it. So you find a place that interests you and just sit quietly for a while, following what's going on and allowing the industry of nature to resume. Because after a while, it'll forget you're there and it'll go back to its normal routine. And that's when you start to see things that you wouldn't see on a normal basis. And I'll give you a little hint. I got a column coming out soon. And anybody know what antlions are? Antlions? Okay, one head, two heads, okay. And a half, okay, all right, okay. Antlions are about a 1/4 inch in size, and they're little dog ugly creatures. They are scary, ugly creatures that live in the bottom of a conical shaped hole, and they wait for ants to come in. And then they throw dirt up and make the ant fall down, and then they have these large pincers and they just grab the ant and it disappears underground and they eat it. While sitting and seeing, I discovered that. I noticed a little funnel-shaped holes in the ground under a tree that I was sitting by. I was being really lazy. I was just sitting on a lawn swing in my front yard. And I just thought initially the holes were drip marks from dew that had fallen from the tree, which if I'd thought about it at any length of time, I would have realized that wasn't a practical solution because they were too symmetrical. They were all the same. There was about 20 of them. And, but I'm sitting there in the swing, kind of watching the world go by, doing my little sit and see moment. At least that was my excuse for sitting there. And all of a sudden, I noticed a little ant walking in the funnel, and then I saw the dirt starting to fly up. I thought, wow! And that's how I discovered an antlion. And so there'll be a column coming out soon on antlions and their very unique method of feeding. So that's about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll answer any questions that anybody might have. I don't see anybody yawning yet, but
just gonna see if there's questions on.
oh, sure, yeah, questions online or questions from the audience. I'm happy to answer them. There's one there. Okay, paraphrase what she said. I didn't hear. Oh, sure. The question is about the trail cameras and the sophisticated cameras. Like probably a lot of you, I just started with a little, they call them trail cameras or game cameras. They're all self-contained. Some of them are fancy that have cell phones that send the pictures, but no, I just got the simple ones. They were Browning trail cameras. If you're anybody that's interested in, for those of you at home, there's a company called trailcampro.com. trailcampro.com. And you can get a good camera from anywhere from about 150 on up. But what I like about Trail Cam Pro, they don't manufacture cameras, they sell them, but they're an incredible resource. They have an information library that helps you understand what do I want to buy? Because there's a million different choices, and it asks, you know, is this important to you or is this important to you? And you can kind of figure out what you want to have. What happened, some of those pictures that I showed you that were a little higher quality, I decided I wanted to elevate the quality of the images that I was capturing at night. And so I invested in the heart of it is a little, what they call a PIR. It's a passive infrared trigger. It's a little device that you buy that you put out, and the animals don't see it because it's infrared. And it's like when you walk into a store and you hear ding, ding, same thing. You break a beam and it sends a signal. And then I purchased a receiver that is attached to my camera, which is just a regular high quality professional 35mm camera in a waterproof case that I made. That triggers the camera. And when the camera triggers, then I have a transmitter attached to the camera that sends a signal out to two regular flash units, 2 or 3 regular flash units that light the scene. So it's a very sophisticated, lot of moving parts, and it takes a little bit of time to set up every time I want to move it. No, I mean, I've written about it, I've mentioned it. There was a column recently on that, but I didn't want to get into the technical specs. There's way too much going on. If you're interested, there's a company called Camtraptions, Camtraptions, Camtraptions. They're in England, and that's where I purchased some of the equipment. And they have a lot of tutorials there too, little interesting information. So there's a hand back here, and I'll get this lady next. Yeah, they do. No, they get used to it. Yeah. No, I haven't found that to be true. As they initially react sometimes, although it's interesting. The first night I put it out, I got a coyote, and I put up a regular trail camera with video, and I had the cam trap set up. And when the flash went off, the coyote practically jumped to the moon. He just erupted and was gone, but he came back. Rabbits didn't care, raccoons didn't care, possums didn't care. It's like, oh, got my picture taken. One rabbit stood there. I probably got 30 pictures, because he was posing. You know, so I think he's narcissistic rabbit. So, but yes, overall, they once it's there and set up, I haven't had any problem with them avoiding the area. They seem to come back. Now, this young lady had a question. Oh, yes. Well, a bald eagle, of course, is pretty definitive because of the stark white head and the white tail. I see those when I work in the fire lookouts. I see those relatively frequently. I'm sorry? On Palomar, yeah. And probably what they're doing is they're probably flying from Lake Henshaw, you know, to someplace else like Wolford or something like that, because they're going from water to water. But they're surprisingly common. And of course, they're not migratory per se, but as their water sources freeze to the north, more of them come south. So in the wintertime, we see more here. You'll see them more. You'll see them frequently at Lake Hodges, Lake Henshaw, Lake Wolford, the Otay Lakes, Sweetwater, places like that where there is a dependable, you know, food supply for them. And are you a birder? Okay, there's a source called eBird where you can go and see people are posting, oh, I saw this today at this location. So you could then go right there, ebird.org. Or org. I believe it's ebird.org. Yep. Okay. Yes, ma'am. I, oh, to the Northern Lights? Or what trip were you talking about? Oh, well, that's sometimes it's the royal we. But yes, my wife goes with me a lot. Sometimes I'll go with friends, you know, all depends. She says, no, I'm not going to the desert when it's 121 degrees. Are you nuts? And she's Canadian. And so she's a lot smarter than I am. And anything online? We answered all their questions. Well, you guys are great. I have copies of my book. If anyone would be interested, see me after this and we'll sign them for you. Thank you all.